All right. Great. We're making progress. Sorry for the wait.
We're almost ready.
All right, Gustav, are you ready?
Yeah, okay, we're ready now. First off, just a brief introduction. My name is Gustav, and I manage the European business development for MakerDAO. And today we're going to present a collaboration we're doing with Centrifuge. So with me on stage is also...
yeah, hey, my name's Lucas. I'm one of the co-founders of Centrifuge. We bring debt and real-world assets into DeFi.
Yeah. Okay. So today, like the presentation is a dual presentation. Both of us will be on stage here. And we will present a project we're doing together, as well as kind of like why we're seeing this as a great opportunity for DeFi, and kind of like the stage that we're at now and where we're moving in the future. So I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys, in these DeFi tracks have seen the graphs, how we reached the 1 billion number. So kind of like you could say that within the last year, decentralized finance have managed to capture a decent amount of assets, but this is of course quite relative, because in the grand scheme of things, this is really not a lot. But it kind of like we really kind of like documented and shown how this actually works, right? And how we actually can do these things purely on the blockchain. However, the assets on the blockchain, in the blockchain space, is still relatively limited. So at Maker we had up until almost 2% of all Ethereum captured in our smart contracts, but it still put us at like a relatively small scale. Another problem that we see in DeFi today is that we kind of like have a very, very big correlation between the assets there. So this figure here basically shows you how correlated that all the assets are with each other, where the more red they are, the worse it is. For some reason, Tron is not correlated with the rest of the assets in this one, but it's not really because we don't really want to diversify ourselves by adding Tron to the collateral pool, for example. That kind of like defy the purpose of what we're doing, I believe. So when we look at like the addressable markets, so like what is actually being used in traditional finance is like good collateral. Looking at global trade is incredibly interesting, right? You have a lot of asset that is moving. You have a lot of finance being done already. So what we're looking at now is like how can we then take and capture some of all of this value that transfers day to day in this like already very, very proven use case of financing within trade and kind of like use it as collateral in our system. Specifically, one of the sectors that we have then really taken a closer look at with Centrifuge is within SME, so small and medium enterprises, in their financial possibilities. The assets that is being used here are US dollar stable or euro stable. They are often very, very uncorrelated because each of the assets is often tied to the balance sheet of that individual company. And the yields in this space are very, very high, so it's quite attractive, and it's a place where we believe we can be very, very competitive. So today, like you see, a lot of the SME factoring is being done with interest rates above 20% per year. So it's quite expensive for the borrowers, and at the same time quite profitable for the lenders here. So what we then are doing here is that we're moving towards like the path where we can really, taking these real-world assets, use them as collateral, specifically, invoices or trade finance. It will enable us to get these like very strong uncorrelated assets into the system, as well as kind of like bridging Maker and DeFi out to like a section where instead of being a purely crypto-focused company, then we will actually be sitting in like the intersection between fintech, finance, and crypto, and kind of like enable us to bring value and add value to all of those three ecosystems. And as you're probably familiar, in for example, fintech and finance is where like the majority of the world's users are today, right? So we kind of like really want to bridge us into this. With Centrifuge, we have already proven the use case. We have done quite a lot of mainnet transactions with them. We currently have 270,000 DAI transacted on mainnet. So we have proven the use case, but we haven't scaled it yet. So this is what we are looking to do now. Okay, last one. So basically, the project that Lucas is going to tell you a little bit more about today is in the gig economy. So basically, in, for example, Southeast Asia, the gig economy is very, very big. We see some major players, such as like Grab, for example, really having scaled up, and this is something that people, they use a lot. The gig economy can be everything from, an Uber driver to someone delivering groceries, as the example that we will go through with you today, to people doing other kind of like tasks. The thing, like some of the problems here is that it's very, very cash-based. A lot of the people providing these services, so kind of like the workers of the gig economy companies, they often come without bank accounts. Around 80% of them come without bank accounts. Grab, which is probably the biggest one in Southeast Asia, they've also stated that since they started operations, they've actually onboarded more than 2 million people into bank accounts. They have limited access to finance. They have very limited starting capital. If you don't even have a bank account, it might be very difficult to, put up the front costs for like buying groceries for, your Christmas dinner for like $100. And then the last thing is that, of course, they have like no savings account. So Lucas, you will go a little bit over the case study we have now with a partner we work with in Southeast Asia called ShuttleOne.
Yeah, so I'll talk about ShuttleOne, which is one of the partners we're working with. Gustav already mentioned the 270,000 DAI that we did on mainnet. So like those are transactions preparing up for MCD launch and sort of now going forward of like working with different asset originators to like get them to show how this works and sort of build these asset classes in preparation for getting them into MCD, sort of onboarding them to other lending protocols and sort of establishing these somewhat very different assets in DeFi. And I'll try to do my best sort of in 10 minutes to show just like what this process looks like from beginning to end with this partner that we're going to talk about, ShuttleOne. So ShuttleOne is interesting for three big reasons. Where lending essentially is the primary one, where we want to enable gig economy workers to borrow in DAI, to borrow from crypto. But then actually, sort of as we start to give them crypto, of course, they can also start thinking about, oh, like maybe I should save some of that crypto and use the DAI savings rate, for example. They can use it for remittance and sending money around. As Gustav mentioned, like 80% of the users that start working in these gig economy jobs, actually they first start with getting a bank account, because today they probably live like largely using cash. And actually, like ShuttleOne's one thing they already did, like on this, as you can see here, this is one of their co-founders, Zhang, has been working on actually finding ways that you can onboard these users who are unbanked into crypto, because, well, like how do you even get them to buy DAI? And what they did is they started partnering with telecom companies, correct me if I'm wrong, but to take your prepaid credit card credit, right? One of a very common way to send money around today in these countries, to like buy DAI. And so like by offering these lending products, by expanding sort of DeFi to cover these users, we can like bring a lot of these exciting new features and benefits that DeFi can offer to a whole new user base. So what do? We want to bring these what we call real-world assets into DeFi. So that means we want to create a way that Maker can advance money on these assets. It starts with ShuttleOne sort of as being the asset originator, having these assets sort of to tokenize them. So what we use here is we create non-fungible tokens for these different invoices. Why non-fungible tokens? Because actually, if you look at trade finance, every invoice has an independent credit risk. It's from one buyer to a different supplier. You can't just chop it up. It's not an ERC20 token, right? So like you start with an NFT that represents this one item of collateral. In our example with ShuttleOne, it would be actually the future revenue, or like the money that the credit card company is paying the worker, indirectly the worker, first the app, but then the worker in the end, that the end user, the customer that wants to get their food delivered, paid using their credit card, right? So you have like the user pays a credit card company, the credit card company holds on to that money for 90 days and then pays out. And so you have this problem that in those 90 days you're strapped for cash. And so what ShuttleOne does is it sort of creates these non-fungible tokens that we then put into TinLake, which is a set of smart contracts that allows you to create these portfolios for assets and mint an ERC20 token against, which can then be used sort of as collateral in Maker and other lenders. So I'll go a little bit into detail what we're doing here. So the first step is creating this invoice, or creating this NFT. I'm sorry. When a company wants to borrow money, the first step is getting this asset on chain. So you can think of this invoice existing as a legal contract somewhere that says there's a $2,000 payment from the credit card merchant to this supplier, shopper Bob. It's due on a certain date, and this is the buyer who's paying it. What we do is we create an NFT that basically represents this claim on money. So now you have, by owning this NFT, by moving this NFT around, you can sort of determine who now should have the claim on that money once the invoice becomes due. So I can buy this NFT today and get the money on due date, or I can log up this NFT and use it as collateral to borrow money against it. The second step is actually using our TinLake smart contracts, because sort of as I talked about before, we now have all of these different NFTs. One of the challenges is, well, like you have to have a way to price these assets, to sort of bundle them, to get them into Maker, to get them into to sort of get other investors to onboard. And one of the challenges there is that, well, like if you do it on an invoice by invoice level, like it's quite a bit of a process. So you want to create an asset class, and so for example, what ShuttleOne is doing here is they're saying, well, we're going to take these gig economy invoices, and we're going to create a pool of those, and you can invest in a pool of those. And you can actually, like, of those $10 million of assets that you have, we can put some amount into Maker. We can maybe offer it to other investors. We will probably invest part of our own money into that, sort of as a way as a show of value. And then sort of now you have a scalable product, because now you have hundreds of assets on sort of the borrower side, where you deposit these invoices, you get your DAI, and on the investor side, actually, we have one feature that I want to go into in a bit more detail, which is like we actually mint 2 tokens. So those are the 2 ERC20 tokens that are used to represent sort of a share, to use that function as a share in that collateral pool. Those 2 tokens function slightly differently. And if you're familiar with structured finance, this is essentially a structured product where the drop token is a senior tranche and the tin token is a junior tranche. The drop token is actually the low yield but very stable asset that is insured by the tin token investors. So you can think of it, if we have $1 million in invoices that you invest in, we raise $800,000 from drop token holders and $200,000 from tin token holders. That means that if there are any losses in this overall portfolio, the tin token holders eat those losses first, meaning the senior token holders, the drop token holders, always get paid back first. The reason why those tin token holders do that is, well, because they get a higher yield. So you promise the drop token holders a certain yield, and you take the difference, and the tin token holders essentially can make a much higher return if it goes well, but also have this leveraged exposure if it goes badly. And so we see 2 different users for these assets, right? So like Maker is interested in stable collateral in like a very liquid, sort of a very liquid, larger set collateral. Whereas the tin token is just like very high risk, asset that you want to invest in if you understand it very well, if you want to have this yield. So it makes like it's the ideal way to get like very qualified sort of expert investors into these assets. And like one of the key like TIN token holder is actually the asset originator. So like the asset originator invests along with the senior investors in that pool, sort of as a way to show that they have skin in the game, right? Like they would, by buying TIN, they effectively say, look, like we trust that these assets are good. So if we wouldn't, then well, we'd take any losses that happen first. I think just one other point I want to make is like when sort of designing TinLake, right? Like if you compare that to other security tokens or like projects where they try to tokenize a house, I think a key difference is that we start with the NFT, we start with the individual asset and have like all of this on chain, because that's like long term. You want to have that transparency on chain. You want to like move more and more on chain as this grows, right? Like whereas like a lot of times these asset classes on chain, all they do is they have this very centralized issuing entity that just says, oh, there's some tokens and there's like something off chain that's related to it, but we're not really going to share much. So I think that's like the two features that I wanted to highlight about TinLake and sort of how ShuttleOne will be using it to now create an asset class that actually is interesting collateral for Maker. And I'm already running way behind schedule, so I'll try to speed up a little bit. But essentially, like sort of by deploying TinLake, you now have a scalable asset class that can be put into MCD, where you can advance money for these gig economy workers that can now borrow, get their DAI, and sort of grow their business. Back to you.
Yeah. So basically, the thing that we're doing with ShuttleOne is actually, so of course all of this sounds like a lot like concepts, but actually we're doing like the first mainnet transactions next week, I believe. So this is of course not using MCD fully, because for us to actually use MCD as the place where we actually get the finance from, we need to vote it through the community, right? So basically, like the opportunity that is for us here is that we're not only onboarding the company, we're also onboarding the entire user base into the system and adding all of these new users to DeFi. Specifically with ShuttleOne, the mainnet transaction we're doing next week, it's actually one of the bigger gig economy platforms in Indonesia. So we're actually taking not just ShuttleOne, who is a digital like crypto company, but we're actually onboarding a whole traditional institution that already does this, already have. They have hundreds of thousands of users, and like the main goal, like over time, is to onboard all of these into more and more services that are using DeFi. However, as I'm sure you guys are aware, we kind of like need the community support also for this. So even though we present this as something that we believe that there's a very strong opportunity for us here, we still kind of like need the buy-in and the Maker governance to support this as well. So of course we're preparing all of these things to make it as easy of a vote as possible, but essentially in the end we still need the community support, which we hopefully will get.
I think that's why we're here today, right? So
yeah, that's one of the reasons we present today.
Maybe that's a good segue into our last slide, which is like questions. We presented this sort of concept because we want the community to start thinking about real world assets, start thinking about how that can be a potential for DeFi and how it can grow. I'm not going to go back to that slide that shows $180 trillion of B2B spend, but right, like if we think of crypto today and where we can go, like let's start grabbing like a small piece of that and bringing it into crypto and sort of showing what these advantages are. But yeah.
I don't know how much time we have, but I think hopefully we have time for like one of the questions.
Thank you. So yeah, is there like another way to assess like the risk of let's say like the invoice you're going to make like an NFT out of, other than like the how much the originator is invested in like it was the TIN token, right? The second one. Like, is there any other way to like kind of like assess the risk of the invoice or of default, or whatever you want to call it?
Other way than just
like, is that enough? That's my question.
Oh, so okay, so I mean, what we're doing by sort of moving in this, like moving this information on chain is like we're basically saying we're aiming for having the best process we have today for pricing these assets, right? Like the invoices are being financed in the order of hundreds of billions every year. Actually, the factoring market is a 3 trillion market, right? There are many different data providers that do this today. By bringing this on-chain, by sort of having these different underwriters, Oracle providers in crypto speak, right, that can give pricing signals into this, we can actually like hopefully create a more transparent way that these parties can price it, and like long term have a way that we can measure them and say, okay, like you're doing good work, you should be incentivized to do more. You're not doing good work, you should maybe like get kicked out of the set that sort of determines these prices.
Okay, cool. And so then, yeah, it's kind of like at this point, like the more invested you see like an originator in like it's the junior tranche, right? The one that pays like the high yield. Then the more you can trust it at this point, right?
Well, the lower the risk is for you, right? So like if you have a 30% junior tranche, then like the senior is protected on, up to a 30% loss of the entire portfolio. So like if you have 100 invoices, 30 invoices go bust, like you're probably still good percentage-wise. If it's only a 5%, like you're less protected, but it's so it depends on the asset class, right?
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, I would also just mention there that, I mean, we already have this is based on like revenue of the company, right? So like we know the revenue of the company, we know the default rates, we know everything behind the company, right? So like we're bringing it on chain and making it transparent in that sense. But the same way today, if you do invoice financing, I mean, if you have 10,000 invoices and you have all the payment data behind them, I mean, you can very, very easily kind of like figure out what is the default rate, what is the risk of this asset, and so on. So we're taking it and put it on chain, make it transparent to the public in that sense. But it's something that is already now like relatively easy to actually risk assess.
Any last question?
Okay. One more question, if anyone has anything on mind? No? Okay. Well, then we want to thank you all for coming, and hopefully you'll help support us when we want to move these things past the governance process, and please give us feedback on Twitter and in our Telegram channels and so on. Yeah, and on the Maker Forum too. Yeah, so thank you all. Thanks for listening to us.